4 children. And the first question is, how have we disciplined our children? Often, because in those early years that are just, you're just exhausted because it's just one thing right after the other. You're having to deal with and teach and instruct and all those things that are so important for them to learn as they're growing up. And so discipline them often. I remember, this is a funny story. John is 4 years younger than Andy. And so John came to me one day and says, Mom, he was about 5. He said, why is it that I get so much more discipline than Andy does? I said, oh, John, that is a great question. Really, it's a good question. That's a good question for her. I said, it's a good question. He said, you want to know the answer? I said, Andy's found a secret. And he said, really? I said, yeah. He said, what is it? I said, you really want to know? He said, yes. If he doesn't disobey me, he doesn't get disciplined. Now, a light bulb came on in my child's head. You would have thought he would have known that. Would you have thought he would have known that? And he went, I think I can do that. It was like it never occurred to him. So he was a different child after that. But disciplining them and being willing to discipline your children. It's not fun. It's not easy. It's hard work. If you're going to be consistent, it's hard work. It just is. There's some of us in this room that have been down that road, and we'll be glad to cheer you on. The discipline part is very, very important. This is the statement. In our home, we decided to follow this statement. We will be faithful to discipline our children. Underline the word faithful or circle it or something. We will be faithful to discipline our children. Rebellion and disobedient behavior that does not please the Lord. Okay, let's look at that. Rebellion, sin is rebellion. Sin is rebellion toward God. You think your children are disobeying you. They are. It's the early stages of rebellion. That's what it is. I'll be my own boss, right? I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to be in charge. And so that's the first thing. Rebellion and disobedient behavior that does not please the Lord. Take yourself out of the equation. It's not because you want to make mommy happy and daddy happy. It's not because if you don't obey, I'm going to pull my hair out. It's not any of those reasons that you're going to do this. It's because it doesn't please the Lord. And we taught our boys that statement. We do all things to please the Lord. That's what causes mommy and daddy to tick. We do everything we try to do. We do it to please the Lord. We want to please Him, and that's what we expect of you. And rebellion and disobedience definitely does not please Him. And so that's the first thing. Is we're going to talk about that a little more as we go. And it says, will be quickly and consistently, we're going to talk about consistency, quickly stopped, and discipline will occur. All right? That means when it's convenient, when it's not convenient. And so we're going to do it. And so let's define the word discipline. Discipline is instruction. We think of physical discipline or time out or whatever you've chosen to do, but it has to be consistent. But anyway, this is what the definition is: training of the mind and character. So you are training this child, training their mind and their character. It means order among. It's a particular system of rules for conduct. Well, we don't live like that in America anymore, do we? A particular system of rules for conduct to bring under control. To bring under control. To chastise or to punish. And instruct means to give direction to or order to, inform, and to fill up that which is lacking. That's my favorite one. You know, your babies come here lacking. If you figure that out, this is funny. Andrew had prayed for a solid year for a baby sister. And so when we found out we were having a boy, back then they didn't do ultrasounds and all that automatically, but because we were having complications with John, they had, and we knew it was a boy. Thank you, Jesus. That would have been trauma for my Andy. This turned out to be a boy. So we started brainwashing him. We'd say, wouldn't it be great to have a brother? Have you ever thought about that? No. And I said, well, you know, you can play ball with you, y'all can run, we have to start naming all these things that big brothers could do together. Wouldn't that be great? He said, well, you know, that is true. I think I'd rather have a brother. And I said, oh, yeah, I think that's a wise decision. And so anyway, like I said, John was preemie. And so we brought Andy, they let us bring Andy into ICU to be introduced to his little baby brother. And they had all these monitor stickers all over him, and Andy was really into stickers, so he thought that was kind of cool. He had all these silver stickers everywhere. He thought that was kind of cool. And, you know, we was looking at him, and we were talking about John and all this, and he looked up at me and he went, this baby don't do nothing. It's true. They're just alone. I remember our pastor his pastor's wife back in Birmingham was such a delight. We met together once a week, and she was just so precious. And she said, you know, that first year you just want to keep the lump alive. So anyway, so it's keeping the lump alive. But they come here lacking in everything. They don't talk. They don't feed themselves. They don't dress themselves, right? You know, it's like I heard Mandy say when Penny got where she could dress herself, she said, you know, I think I can do this. I think I could do this thing. You know, everybody's independent now. We can do this thing. You know, so but they come here just absolutely and totally dependent on us. And you know, our society, gals, has done us a disservice. And maybe you grew up in a home where there were babies and you had to do all the baby stuff and you knew a little bit about babies and all that. But we let our girls be, you know, we don't teach them about how to take care of children. And then all of a sudden, you've got this child and you realize how selfish you really are because, you know, you've had all this time all to yourself, right? You want to go get a pedicure, you went and got a pedicure, right? What's a pedicure? You know, a shower would be nice. Those things that are involved in motherhood, and so they come to us lacking. I can remember one time Andy would do the projectile throwing up, and so that was always fun. Mm-hmm. And Hank came in from work, and I had gotten all dressed up for him to come in. Right before he came in, Andy had thrown up all over me. So I was in my bathrobe, and I said, he walked in the door, and I said, I promise I dressed. Those newborn days are sweet, don't get me wrong, and they're fun, and there's a bonding, but it's exhausting. How about sleep deprivation? Mm-hmm. These moms over here, they know, you know, it's just all of that, and the Lord, like we talked about earlier, this baby's not just for you to help the baby's going to transform you. It's going to make you different to be a mom. You are going to be different. There's going to be a new level of self-sacrifice that you never would have learned any other way. There's going to be a new level of a lot of things. But this baby comes to you lacking. It's your job. You get, you know, it's so fun because that, you know, the first word and then the first tooth and then they start to walk and then they start to run and they start to, you know, all those things. As you're teaching them, you teach them how to hold a spoon. And if you're like I am, I've got left-handed children. It's not easy to teach them to use it, you know, the spoon. And you teach them to write and all those things that are part of that, but also the spiritual aspect of all of that as you're teaching that child. So they come to you lacking. And so we need to realize that as well. And all children have an old sin nature. I know you look at that baby and you think, oh, what a sweet little baby. And they are sweet little babies, but they have no, they're born that way. They're born wanting their own way. It's just hardwired. Some are more. I think all children are strong-willed. I don't think there's not one that's not. Some are sweet about it. I had one girl that I was working with years ago to help her with her children. She said, well, I can't remember the child's name. Let's just make up a name. We'll say Susie. She said, oh, my Susie is just so, if I just say, oh, don't, she starts crying and say, oh, Mommy, I'm so sorry. Well, of course she does. She's not an idiot. But if she's disobeyed you, she's disobeyed you. You can't fall for that. You have to still discipline her. And some are more overt and in your face. No, I won't. You can't make me. I'd rather have the you can't make me's. I'm sorry. Sneaky is harder. Because you don't know if they're really disobeying you or not. You don't know what's going on in that little heart. You know that something's going on in that little heart that just needs to be dealt with. But they're all strong-willed. We all are. We're all rebellious by nature. We're just that way. And that's why Jesus had to die for us. And so anyway, so they have an old sin nature. And you're going to need to know your child. How do they display their old sin nature? And to understand who they are. They're all going to be different. If you have, I have friends that have 10 children. And they tell me they're all different. None of them are the same. None of them are the same. And so they're all going to be different. Now, as I began to look around about how to discipline, the first thing that I saw was my Heavenly Father is the best example that I know. It says he disciplines his own, doesn't it? Scripture tells us that he disciplines us. Why? Because he loves us. And so I thought, okay, let's look at 5 ways he disciplines us. How does God discipline us? The first one is example. He calls us to follow his example and to become like him. He says, be ye holy, even as I am holy. The example, that's the standard. And he asks us to follow him in that. So by example, and we're going to talk a little bit about these. Then love. He loves us just the way we are. And he makes sure we know he loves us. So we're going to learn to incorporate these things into our lives with our children. The first thing is we're going to be a godly, holy example. We're going to walk with the Lord. And if we don't, we're going to confess it and get it right with our children. But we're going to, and then we're going to love them unconditionally. It's not I love you if. It's not I love you if. And he tells us over and over again that he loves us. And he loves us so much that he acted on that love and made sure we would be lacking in nothing. He made sure he acted on that love. Instruction. His law is grace. Now that's something everybody's talking about. Don't be legalistic. Legalistic is the real definition of legalism. If you really look it up in the Greek, legalism is another way of salvation. So if you're trying to earn your way to heaven, you are legalistic. But if you're just obeying the Word of God, that's not legalistic. That's just an obedient child. Now, we don't need to beat anybody else up because maybe they're not where we are in our walk with the Lord, or maybe God allows, and I've seen God do this before in my life. Others may, you can't, Sheila. And I'm like, well, why? And don't ask me why. Because I said so, that's fine. But his law is grace. Do you understand that the law was given? Was man sinful before the law?
Yes.
Yes, he was. Did he have an old sin nature before the law?
Yes.
Every baby that's ever been born is born physically alive and spiritually dead. All right, and so we came into the world like that. The law was given for a standard, a plumb line, y'all. A plumb line, that God would give us that plumb line in order for us to say, this is the way. Has anybody ever hung wallpaper? I have lots and lots of wallpaper, lots and lots, with the wallpaper generation. Everybody wallpapers. But I tell you something, if you don't get a plumb line, And then you take this little thing and it has a little weight on it, and you let it, and it gives you a real straight line according to your wall. Now your wall may not be completely straight, but you got to have a plumb line. If you don't, when you get through with that wallpaper, you're going to be going. You thought you laid one side, you thought you were doing it right, but at the same time, that plumb line is the law. The law was given in order to show us what? That we have a need. To show us that we're sinners. To show us that we're sinners, to expose sin. And so God says, and He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. It says He gives us instruction about our limitations so that we can be safe. So that we can be safe. People will say, well, God just tells us don't. He's just a God of don'ts. Well, if you look into the things that He's told us not to do, they're for our own protection. Because there is danger out there, and He loves us and He wants to protect us. So He's given them He gives us clear instruction so that we can be safe. He instructs us on our responsibilities. You might want to write that word down, responsibilities. Responsibilities, and teaches us to respect others. Those are just a few things that the Lord does that we're going to need to do, incorporate into our parenting. All right? And then He gives a warning. He tells us the consequences of our sin. If you, then. If you, then. I remember, I think Hank and I were just engaged. We weren't married, but he had led some of his professors to the Lord, and one of these couples, they were probably in their early 30s. They had their first child, and she was 15 months old. Cutest little thing. We went to my husband played baseball. We went to a baseball game, and we had our little chairs sitting out by the baseball field, and she looked at her little girl, and she said, sweetie, come with mommy. And she took a stick, y'all. She took a stick and she drew it in a line all the way up to where she was. And she looked at her and she says, don't cross the line. It's not safe over there. It's safe with mommy. Don't. I thought, here's what I thought when I started thinking, right. That's a joke. This is a 15-month-old child. That's a joke. Do you know that child never crossed that line? She'd go and put her foot on it, and she'd look back at her mama, and her mama would go, nope. She'd break it in. But she stayed within the perimeters that her mother had designated for her to stay in. Why? Because she was a super intelligent kid, well, she may have been at 15 months ago. But no, mom had practiced this at home. And she gave her restrictions so that she would be safe. And she knew not to cross the line because she knew what would happen if she did. And so He gives us clear instructions. He gives us clear instructions, and He warns us, and He tells, if you do this, this is the consequences of your sin. Sin has consequences, y'all. It just does. And He appeals to our conscience. And then he says, in effect, if you do this, I will do this. So please don't. If you do this, I will do this. One of my favorite illustrations of this in my parenting experience was my best friend. We had children Annie was born in September and her Jeremy was born in January of that year. And so they were big buds. They were probably 3 by then because there wasn't a John yet. And so they were big buddies, and they lived in a house that had a creek at the back, and the boys loved to play in the creek and stuff. But that day, here's what we said to them: we're going to McDonald's, and they loved to go to McDonald's, not because of McDonald's, because of the playground. All right, and so we said we're going to McDonald's, and y'all are all dressed. We've got a couple of things we need to do in the house, and y'all can go in the backyard and play, but do not get in the creek. Because if you do, we're not going to McDonald's. That'll be the consequence. If you get in the creek, we can't go because you'll be all muddy. We can't go to McDonald's all muddy. And so that was kind of that. But as they walked toward the yard, my friend and I looked at each other and said, "Oh, I hope they obey." We weren't doing that, and God just, is that how you feel about me? You put me out in the backyard and you go to the Father, "Oh, I hope she doesn't disobey, because I've got so many wonderful things that we're going to do today." What a picture. Because he says, you do this is the consequences of your sin. And some sin has natural consequences. And so he does that. And then he says, and then correction comes. This means he follows through with his warnings. And he disciplines his own. He follows through with his warnings. We're going to talk about that later on. Don't make threats that you can't keep. Do not make threats. One of the funniest ones I ever saw, we were at Disney World with our whole family. Kids were little bitty. Kate was little. But, and John was dying laughing because this couple had just passed us and their kids were really being rowdy. And the father said, really in a loud voice, "If you don't stop that, we're leaving." And John looked at me and he says, "He's not going to leave this park. He just paid $100 for a ticket. That daddy's not going to leave the park." And so don't give consequences that you're not willing to carry out. And so methods of training. And these kind of go along with just what we've just said. Instruction. Now, instruction by word of mouth, or written down instructions as they get older. And I meant I'll bring it next week, but I found how memories pop up on Facebook. I had done this chart for someone on how to, some of the things you're going to do and all this kind of stuff. But it was written instructions for the rules so that they could learn the rules. We should make sure that our children understand our instruction. And this means that they are very young. We must always respect. They must always respect the rules in our home until they understand them. They just obey them until they're old enough to understand. That's what that means. And so you're going to give them clear instruction. Now, I'll do that when we get down to tips on chastisement. But it says learning through observation. I forgot the percentage of how much your child learns from observation. I think it's 70% of what they learn. They don't learn from what you say, they learn from what you do. That's kind of terrifying, isn't it? And so, you need to make sure that you're living a godly example in front of your children. And so, because even as he said, even as I am holy, be holy, we must be a holy example. Because they learn so much through observation. They're constantly watching us. Okay, and then 3 training methods are chastisement or correction. Now, we think that that's all discipline is. Discipline is so much more than just the act of whatever method you use to discipline your child. Now, we spanked. But there was a lot that went on before and after it. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But whatever you're doing, if it's time out, if it's whatever it is that you're using, taking away privileges. But some of those things you need to be careful with, because really the person you're punishing is yourself. If you think that. If you can't go anywhere, guess who else can't go anywhere either? Those kinds of things. So really think through what you're planning to do. And disobedience. Listen to this, y'all. Write this down in big, big letters. Listen. To disobey always meant chastisement in our home. Whether it's big, little, or big, it's disciplined. We don't let them get by with, we don't go, oh, that was just such a little thing. I mean, so he slapped his brother, it's not a big deal. I mean, or whatever that thing is, or, oh, well, they were a little disrespectful. Well, I want to deal with it right now. But I'm going to tell you, if you don't deal with it, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I promise it will. And so to make sure, and Hank was so good at correcting our boys. He would always, after the discipline was over, he would always say, now what have you learned from this? And how will you do it differently next time? So that helped them to work through and to see, oh, so what would you do different next time? Okay? All right, now then tips on chastisement. Have a few rules. We didn't have a whole lot of rules. I mean, you can just we just had a few. Make sure they are necessary. Make sure they're necessary. This is an example of what I thought was a necessary rule that my husband didn't think was a necessary rule. And after he said it, I thought, well, maybe it's not a necessary rule. That he was playing with boys and they were running through the house. And I said, oh, no running in the house. And he said, huh? He said, well, maybe in certain parts of the house, but we're going to the den. So we talked about it, not in front of the boys, but we talked about it and said it was okay to chase each other in the house. That's a little thing, but make sure that everybody that they're necessary, and that everybody knows what they are. First of all, you and your husband need to be in agreement. Y'all need to sit down. You want to cause rebellion in your children? You and hubby be on opposite sides of the page on discipline. It will create rebellion quicker than a heartbeat. And so you need to sit down with one another. Maybe take a weekend, get grandmother to keep the babies, and go off of a weekend and figure out, okay, how are we going to run our house? You got the advantage. You don't have any children yet. Do it now. Do it now. Figure out what do we expect? What kind of home do we want this to be? How do we want it to be run? What do we need to do? What are those things that are important to us? Why are we doing these things? And need to be scripturally based as well. But to make sure that you have a few rules. Now, we've already said that our family purpose was to know Him and to make Him known. That was our family purpose, to know Christ and to make Him known. Additionally, we set the goal. We only do that which pleases the Lord. That's what we talked about a while ago. Those are the two things that govern our home. That was the top part of the rules. Those things and everything else kind of came out from those. But only do that which pleases the Lord. Like I said, we made our rules based on those two things. But let me say something here with the rules. If you got more than one child, we first time moms are a little over the top. Maybe you weren't, but I was. I mean, my Andrew, my Andy, I had put little pegs up just tall enough for maybe a 2-year-old to be able to put something on, and I made bags for his toys, and I painted a picture of the toy that was in the bag on the front of the, I was an art major, okay? I painted a picture of the toy that was in the bag on the front of the bag, and we hung them all along the wall in his room. He wasn't allowed to get another bag down until he had first put the toy that was in the first bag back before you could get another bag, right? That's a little over the top. He's a little but he loved his bag. Now, he loved his bags. Oh, he loved his little bags. He thought that was so fun to put his toys back. I think he enjoyed the bags as much as he did the toys that were inside the bags. All right, and so then, by the time John came along, 4 years later, a friend of ours had made a toy box. Not quite as big as that couch, but bigger than this. It was huge. He made it for me. It was huge. And I had, on the top of it, we put little roads and a village and all this kind of stuff where they could play with their cards I painted on it and all this. And the rule when John came along was, as long as it's in the toy box before you go to bed, that's all that matters. But here's the thing that I really realized. Now, those two things were kind of funny, but there were other things that I thought that John would just get it from osmosis, I guess. I mean, Andy knew what the rules were, right? He loved rules. Andy loved rules. His firstborn, right? And I realized that I had not given John some clear instruction in a lot of areas. And so I had to sit down with him and go over the rules with him. So each child needs to be informed at a certain age. You need to go back over the rules with that child again to say, okay, now this is why, and this is what the rules are, and this is how we're going to do it here, and all those kinds of things. But learning to do that and making sure that each child understands the rules, that you're not just expecting. And I've seen parents, grab a kid up, which is not good discipline, grab a kid up and start lecturing them or whatever, screaming at them. And you could see it in the eyes of the kid. They didn't have a clue what was going on. They didn't know what they'd done wrong. Irritated daddy, evidently, or whatever. And so make sure they know what the rules are and what's expected of them. So and don't have a million rules either. You don't want to get these children where they, they're afraid to move or whatever. Now, number 2 is be consistent and impartial. Be consistent is probably the hardest thing as a parent that you are going to have to do. I can tell you there were a few times that I had to go back to the boys over an issue and say, Mom has not been consistent in this area. I've been letting you get by with it, and I really need to ask your forgiveness, and we're going to change from here on out. And they would make a joke out of it, but or say, "Oh, that's okay, Mom. It's not a big deal." And I say, "Yeah, it is a big deal. It is a big deal." So be consistent. That consistency is not easy because it might not be. It's hard. Okay, let's just take telephone habits. I mean, it's hard to say to your friend, "Excuse me, I've got to stop and take care of this," or I'll call you back in a few minutes, or whatever, to stop what you're doing. What maybe you really want to be doing is talking to your friend, and that's that's death to self, and laying that thing down to take care of this and to deal with that child as well. Now we had hand signals, and so if I was on the phone and they came running up at me, I just went, and they knew that I had this said 2 things to them. Mother knows I'm here, okay, and she said not to move. She said not to say another word. And then they would know that in my conversation I'm going to say, my child is standing here and they have a need. Excuse me, please. Then I would turn to them and say, okay, did you need something? And let them, instead of just allowing them to rush in and start screaming and hollering and interrupting your phone call. And there again, if we were in public and they were doing something that I would just put my hand down, and they would know, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I better stop. And so just little things. You could come up with your own, whatever those are, but we had hand signals so that we could communicate with one another and know what needed to be done. And the consistency, we just talked about, don't make rules that you don't plan on enforcing. And it will cultivate, inconsistency cultivates rebellion. You know why? Because that you can see it in their eyes. I got by with this last week. I wonder what she'll do today. Will she stop me, or am I going to get to do what I want to do? So if you got to think of it that way, making sure that you're consistent. And then the other thing is impartiality. Do not show partiality to your children. Are you going to treat them as individuals? Yes. Are they different? Yes. You're going to have to deal with them in different ways? Yes. But the rules are the rules. And if you break the rules, you're disciplined, period. Because if you want to see what partiality will do to a family, read the life of Joseph. His daddy showed favoritism to Joseph, and his brothers hated him so bad they couldn't even talk to him. So if you want to cultivate that kind of relationship with your children with each other, then you show partiality. And a lot of times, daddy has a favorite and mama has a favorite. Shame on you. Now, are some children easier to love? Absolutely. But you cannot show partiality. You cannot show partiality to those children, because they will, not only will they'll know that they can get by with stuff with you, but at the same time it will cause them to hate the other sibling. And you don't want that to happen, and you're going to cause strife between them. And so you want to be very, very careful not to allow that to happen, okay? All right. Number 3, don't argue. I never will forget being in the grocery store and listening to a 3-year-old out argue her mother. I was like, oh my goodness. Don't argue. I'm not going to argue with you. You're just going to enforce. You're just going to enforce. Now, what we did here is this. Is we started a system where the children had to ask to speak. In other words, this is what as I got a little bit older, in other words, if I gave a command or Daddy gave a command, you had the right to say, "May I speak, please?" That meant you didn't agree with what I asked you to do and you want to talk about it. If I say yes, you may talk, as long as you're respectful. If your tone changes to disrespect, it's over. And if I say don't say another word, you better not say another word. But as long as you are respectful and you can plead your case, and then I'll make a decision based on what you've said. Now, one of our children, instead of having his children say, "May I speak, please?" he says that they have to say, "May I ask a question, please?" That does sound a little bit better. That's a little more refined. You find your children refine what you do. But anyway, but yeah, may I ask a question? And so you want them to have a voice. You don't want to take their voice away, but you want them to learn to be respectful at the same time. Okay? So that's what. But don't argue with them. And if they start to argue, just say, "You're arguing with me. I want you to do it now. You lost the right to speak. If you started arguing, you already lost the right to speak. Do it now. Do it now." All right. This is a big one, number 4. And we girls are so good at this one. Don't nag. Don't nag. Here's what nagging looks like. Do not touch that. You're going close to it. I said, don't touch it. You're getting way too close to what I told you not to touch. I said, don't touch it. Put it down. And we've not done anything, right? That's nagging. Instead of saying, don't touch it. And if they touch it, they get disciplined. They disobey. It's clear. It's not confusing to the child. You said do something, they do it. If they do, you said don't do something, they do it. Then there's consequence. There's consequence. And so you're constantly staying on top of things. All right. But don't nag. After everyone understands what the rules are, to tell them once is enough. Once. And so we have a saying in our home: slow obedience is no obedience. And so if you were told to do something, you had to do it right away. Number 5, Stop the little things. You know, I've had many parents say to me, some of this is just ridiculous. You're talking about constantly being on your kids. I said, no, you're not. If this system is in play, you really aren't having to do a whole lot at all after a while. They know the system. They know what to do. They know what's going to happen if they do it. And unless there's rebellion in their heart, you're going to have to deal with that. But you're not. It's not. Because if you deal with the little bitty thing, and they'll say, well, we just wait till it's really big. Wow. Really big? I think you can lose your cool over that. Maybe you're not like me, but if I wait till it's really big, I might just be really mad by the time it really happens, you know? And so if you're dealing with those little things all along, little by little by little, and training them and training them and training them and training them, before long, there's not as much, it's like John said about Andy. Why does Andy not get in trouble as much as I do? He learned the system. He learned to obey, and he learned to do the right thing. And so that's what we want for our children. Number 6. And if you're guilty of this one, please go to your children and ask for their forgiveness, and then don't do it anymore. No sarcasm or ridicule. Just call sin sin and deal with the sin. Don't be sarcastic with them. You know, you always do this. That pierces the heart of a child. You know what that says to them? That's who I am. That's who I am. She said so. But whatever means of sarcasm you use, don't do it. Don't do it. Number 7, don't make threats you can't carry out. We've already talked about that. Make sure that you know, whatever your consequences is going to be, you're going to stick by it, and don't make threats that you can't carry out. Number 8, make your children take personal responsibility for their sin and call it sin. Don't call it a mistake or a bad decision. And here's what we had our children say. I was wrong to do what such and such. Help them to name their sin. You know, we would go back and talk to the boys, and I say, why are we going to have to be disciplined? I don't know. Well, did you do something we weren't supposed to do, maybe? I don't know. You know, but then finally they would, you know, I'd say, well, were you unkind? Did you, you know, whatever the sin was that they'd done. But help them to verbalize it. But then, not just to verbalize it to you, but then help them to verbalize it back to the Lord. Now, until they come to Christ, we have them ask for forgiveness for their sin. After they come to Christ, we have them thank Him that He paid for that sin. And I know that's just a little bitty thing, but I think for them to understand that their sins are paid for. But we made them verbalize it. And if they, we didn't let them say, I'm sorry. I just saw with my boys that I'm sorry can be so flippant. And it can also be, you know, it can mean a lot of things. I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry you're mad at me. I'm sorry whatever. I'm sorry. And usually when a kid says I'm sorry, it's kind of like, I'm sorry. All right? Instead of I was wrong. I need your forgiveness. Now, if they've hurt someone else in the meantime, make sure they go back and verbalize that to the person that they hurt. And get their forgiveness as well. So we're going to work at making sure that they're staying clean with their sin. In other words, they're asking for forgiveness. They're learning what they did was wrong. You're teaching them, now what have you learned? It's a constant teaching process. Discipline should be a teaching process. A teaching process.